Okay. So we'll wait till there's like a decent number of people in there. It will show you. We'll say like this will start popping up. This is the comment thing if you want to talk to them. But you'll start seeing like names and stuff pop
How
up
many
there.
do you want there to be before you?
A decent number.
What does that mean? Like a range?
I'm thinking about it. So definitely more than one. Like 10, 15, something like that. Yeah. Yeah, and you should see comments start popping up. Stuff like that. What's up, guys? Welcome to the stream. Welcome to the class. We're going to give it a little while. Sorry for being late. We had some technical difficulties for some reason getting into Facebook Live and getting it to adapt to our camera. So we had to do some quick fixes. So we're going to wait till a few more people jump in the stream and then go with this thing. You're all good, Daniel. Yeah, for some reason, the angle was just like, or whenever we flipped it over to our phone, flipped our phone over, it was just like warping the video. So we had to figure out a way to get it to work. So you're all good, bud. Thanks for stopping by. Looks like we got about 5 people in here. Let's say it's about 10. I think we'll go on with our class. Jordan, what's up? Welcome to the stream, my friend. Good to see you. Hope you're doing well. There's 9, 11. Oh, maybe we should wait a little bit longer. Annette! What's going on, Lightning? How are you? Welcome to the stream. If you guys don't mind, could you give me a little thumbs up if you guys can hear me okay? Can you guys hear me? Oh, yes, maybe. All right. Sativa. Hey, what's going on, Aaron? What's going on, guys? Okay, cool. All right, so it looks like it's working somewhat. So let's get started here. All right, guys. So first of all, welcome to my very messy garage / dojo space, and welcome to my class, The Fundamentals of Stance. Now, unfortunately, SKBC got canceled, and this is one of my favorite classes to teach at SKBC, and normally I do it with Delos, who himself has a lot of good knowledge about footwork, stance, all that kind of a thing. But I think we can still get some of the fundamentals of stance across, and give you guys some information. Not only some information, but a little exercise and drill for you to be able to practice your stance at your homes, right? You really don't need a lot of space to practice a good stance, and it is super important to practice your stance because it is the first line of defense and your first line of offense. Without a good stance, you won't be able to mount as effective attacks as you would with a good stance, nor will you be able to defend against incoming attacks if your stance ain't right, okay? So really you should try and practice your stance as much as possible, right? To the point where it becomes muscle memory, right? Like I said, you don't need a lot of space to do it, right? If you're like in line somewhere and hopefully, especially right now, hopefully you're only going outside for essentials. But let's say you're like at the grocery store, right? Well, you don't have to stand in line at the grocery store like this. You can adopt a stance and stand there. Will people look at you weird? Absolutely. But you probably also wear your best wizard blouse out to the park every weekend. So you see what I'm saying? And it pays to spend a lot of time practicing your stance and honing your stance. Really, it should be the first thing you think about when you're about to fight, because your stance is going to develop as you do. We all have different bodies, all have different body types, right? And so what I'm going to show you today is kind of just a basic ground level fundamental way to get into a good, what we call an L stance, all right? But you're going to find your own preference. You're going to figure out what works for you. Maybe you like to stand a little bit taller or lower than I do. Maybe you like to have your feet a little bit farther apart, okay? All that's fine, but we have to learn the fundamentals first, right? It's like we say every SKBC, there's really no such thing as like advanced techniques. Advanced techniques are really just knowing when and where to stretch and break the rules of the good fundamentals of fighting, okay? So a good stance has, I think, 3 major components, okay? And the first is balance, the second is form, and the third is relaxation, okay? So let's go over and talk about balance first, all right? This one is pretty self-explanatory, right? Balance is your weight distribution, how much weight you have forward or backwards on your feet, right? Your balance is very important to be aware of when you're getting into your stance, because your balance affects your ability to move effectively in any given direction at any given time. And we really want to try and stay having good balance throughout as much of the fight as we can, okay? Now form, when I talk about form, I'm referring to your body alignment. Another way of putting it is posture, okay? Is my head above my shoulders? Are my shoulders above my hips? Are my hips above my knees? Are my knees above my feet? Okay? If I compromise and go forward or backwards or side to side, any which way, I could be compromising my overall stance, which again is going to limit my choices as far as movement, as far as mounting good offense and defense. So you guys are already probably inferring that these are interconnected, right? Like I can't have good balance for fighting if I don't have good form, okay? And the third thing that I think is one of the key things is relaxation. And the reason I think that is because you don't want to fight your own body when you move, right? You don't want to create unnecessary tension. The more relaxed you are, the quicker you'll be able to respond and react to what your opponent is doing, okay? All right, so that's a little bit of the fundamentals of stance, all right? And I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning of the class, but if you guys have any questions, post those up in the comments. And then at the end of the stuff that I want to show you guys, we can do a little Q&A. And I have my beautiful camera woman working behind the scenes that will read those questions out to me, so I won't be running back and forth. All right? So how do we find a good stance? Okay? The stance that I'm going to show you guys, this good stance, is kind of ubiquitous amongst all martial arts that have some kind of striking component, okay? So what we're going to talk about is the L stance. And I'm trying to do this thinking you guys are seeing me backwards, so left to right. Hopefully I got that right. But we're going to talk about the L stance, okay? And like I said, if you go to any martial art or do any sort of combat sport, they're probably going to have, maybe they're going to call it the L stance, maybe they're going to call it something else. But you're going to see this basic stance across a lot of these different domains, okay? And so what does a good L stance look like? A good L stance is here, okay? My feet, my front foot points at my opponent, right? I can choose my toe to point at my opponent, right? I like to use my big toe. If I'm fighting you guys, I like to use my big toe here to be, can they see that all right? Yeah, to point towards my opponent. My training partner, Shion, he's a little pigeon-toed. He likes to take a little bit more of a pigeon-toed stance. So I think he really uses his pinky toe to do that. But it's the same thing, really. Okay? So my front foot is pointing at my opponent, and my back foot, right here, my right foot, is sort of here off at a 45-degree angle. Okay? So I'm going to show you guys real quick a really good method that I have learned to find a good stance, okay? So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to stand up straight. And if you guys are doing this at home, feel free to follow along and do the same thing I'm doing, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is stand up straight, okay? Now, when I'm standing up straight, I'm not putting my feet together. Nope. I'm putting them about a fist distance apart, approximately. I like to use the fist as a good measuring tool when I'm doing a lot of form stuff because like I mentioned earlier, everybody's bodies are different and unique, right? So I don't want to tell you something that really works for me but may not work for you if you're shorter or a lot taller than I am, okay? So I have about roughly a fist distance between both my feet, okay? I make sure my hips are not too far back or too far forward, right? Right here over my knees. My knees are over my ankles, okay? So I'm already kind of honing into this sense of balance, right? My sense of equilibrium, okay? And I'm gonna make sure my shoulders drop. Now, relaxation, that's number 3, right? That's one of the keys of having a good stance. I'm not going to force them down and keep them down, right? I'm just going to drop them, relaxation, right? And then I'm going to slightly push my chest out and pretend like somebody is pulling me with a rope from the apex of my skull, okay? So that's so that all the vertebrae in my spine sort of line up, right? And I'm not too far forward, too far back. I'm not hunched, anything like that. So I need to find this place right now, okay? Then what I'm going to do when I feel good, and one of the reasons I like this particular exercise for finding a good stance is it also teaches you how to listen to your body, which is a very important skill to learn, right? Developing your proprioception, right? And your own body awareness, right? We can really only control ourselves in a fight, so it pays to learn to listen to what your body is doing and how it's feeling, right? Because your body will tell you, do I have a little too much weight one way? Am I unbalanced in another way? Does something hurt? These are all very important things to listen to our body and respond to in an appropriate way, right? So I'm standing up here straight, feeling like somebody's pulling me with a rope from the top of my head. I'm relaxed, okay? Feel good here, all right? I'm going to take a left foot forward stance. You can do this either way, whatever way you feel more comfortable. But what I'm going to do here with my back leg, which is going to be my right leg, right, is I'm going to rotate or sorry, that's a bad word. I'm going to pivot. Pivot is a better word for this type of motion. On my heel to about a 90-degree angle, okay? So I pivot on my heel, still looking forward, still keeping my hips forward to a 90-degree angle on the heel of my foot, okay? I put my foot down. Then what I'm going to do on the ball of my foot, okay, is pivot it to a 45-degree angle, okay? So here I go, I'm pivoting my foot to roughly a 45-degree angle, okay? Now, if you're very unfamiliar with stance, maybe you're newer to fighting, take a moment here, okay? Maybe you have a lot of experience in fighting, right? I think it still pays to take a moment here if this is the drill that you're practicing and listen to your body. Again, check in. Make sure everything still feels balanced, okay? Make sure you have good form. Make sure you're still relaxed, okay? So after I have rotated once on my heel to a 90-degree, again on the ball of my foot to a 45, I'm going to repeat that process, starting to pivot on the heel of my back foot, again to a 90-degree angle, okay? So pivoting to a 90-degree angle, right? And now I'm starting to open my hips up a little bit, which is also very important. Then I'm going to do the same thing that I just did a step ago. I'm going to pivot on the ball of my foot to another 45-degree angle, okay? Now, when you hit this point, what's really important is to make sure that your feet aren't outside your shoulders, okay? In general, this is something I see a lot in foam fighting, is people with their feet too far apart. You can fight very wide, but you need to know how and you need to know when, okay? And at what range and what situations that fighting with a very wide stance is going to be beneficial to you. In general, though, you're going to fight with your feet inside your shoulders, right? Because fighting long like that has a tendency to really put a strain on good footwork fundamentals, right? You want to be able to use macro movements, a lot of long jumpy stuff, as well as micro movements, right? Which is tighter footwork, okay? And tighter is a little bit safer. I'm not saying don't have a wider stance. Again, this is something that you can deal with by yourself and sort of figure out what your preference is. But I think starting first with the fundamentals and then learning your preferences is a better way to do it, okay? So I have my back foot off here at a 45-degree angle. I've got my front foot pointed at my opponent, okay? Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to drop my weight, okay? And the way that I'm going to do that is simultaneously when I drop my weight, which is going to look something like this, okay? My knees are going to open slightly and I'm going to open my hips, okay? The hips don't lie, right? Generating good power and good form comes so much from the hips because the hips connect your legs, which are your explosive power generation muscles, your glutes, your quads, your calves, right? They transfer that up through your core, into your shoulder, and out your arm, right? So I want my hips to be open. Not so open that I don't have good balance or good form, but I want them to be engaged. I want them to be open, right? So I'm going to come up on the ball of my feet, okay, just slightly. I'm not getting on my tippy toes here, but I'm just getting on the ball of my feet. I'm dropping my weight and I'm opening my hips. It looks a little like this, okay? If you need another way of visualizing this motion, it's kind of like you were sitting your butt on the very edge of a chair, okay? So I drop my weight, boom. I open my hips and I come up on the balls of my feet. And a tangible way to see if you're doing this correctly is if you feel a little bounciness here. If you can bounce easily, right? We're getting springy, right? And we need that springiness to generate good power, okay? So this is where we're at right now. Let's talk about the hands, okay? Again, I'm going to use my fist as a metric here, okay? So let's say I'm fighting left-handed, okay? So I've got my good stance, I'm feeling bouncy, I feel my hips being engaged, I'm feeling my knees engaging, I'm feeling my bounciness. One thing I should mention too is be very careful at this point not to lean forward, okay? When we boop, 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 drop our weight, we have a tendency to hunch forward like this, right? Maybe you can see my profile a little bit better. We don't want to do that, all right? We want to stay as upright as possible. Delos likes to call this fighting, looking like you're fighting arrogantly, okay? So we can kind of keep our chin up as a reminder and drop, all right? Now, where do I keep my hands in all this? I got a sword here. Where am I going to have that relative to my body? Again, I'm going to use a fist as a metric because the fist is unique to your own body type, all right? I like to keep my elbow, maybe I should move right here like this. Is that a little bit better? Yeah? Mm-hmm. Okay, I like to keep my elbow roughly a fist distance from my chest, from my rib cage here. What I don't want is my elbow to be behind my torso, okay? Because this diminishes my both attack ability and my defensive ability. Think about it like this. To be able to throw effective shots, I need to expand, and to be able to defend myself, I need to contract, right? So I like to be kind of in the midway between both those extremes, right? So I find using my fist again and keeping it roughly a fist distance from my torso, I can do that. I'm in that midway point, okay? Now, again, if we're talking about other specific guards to take, yeah, there's a ton of exceptions. There's really no like silver bullet or perfect way to do this. I'm just showing you guys the fundamental way, right? The basics, okay? So yeah, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff here, but know what you're doing. Assign intention to your guard, right? If you need a good neutral guard, this is the one I like to use. Fist distance from my torso, okay? I'm trying not to lower it too far or go too high. Again, I'm trying to be kind of between those two extremes. I can go like this kind of horizontal thing, or I can be vertical, right? Either one is fine, but I keep it a fist distance here, okay? So this is what we're looking for when we have a good stance. If you're thinking about, okay, well, what's your weight distribution? I personally, and this is one of those things that you're going to develop your own preference for based on your body type and how you like to fight. I like to have about 60% of my weight on my back leg, and I like to have about 40% of my weight on my front leg, okay? You can totally have 50% and 50%, right? You can be totally balanced, right? The thing about having more weight on one leg or less weight on another is you got to sort of know what to do with those two, with that information that you're getting from your body, right? And how to utilize that in a fight. So one of the reasons that I like a little bit more weight on my back leg is because I can move forward effectively, right? Let me give you an example. If my weight is all on my front leg, or the majority of it is, I can really only move backwards effectively, okay? And I don't really want to move backwards unless I want to move backwards, if that makes sense. If I'm retreating or I'm sort of trying to draw somebody out. Again, I can sort of start to break these good rules and bait things, maybe bait shoulders. But when I start a fight, I'm pretty much always 60-40 in this good neutral guard, okay? So that's a little bit about how to find a good stance. Oh yeah, so one quick thing, and you can develop this into a workout exercise as well. We all know and love squats, right? I'm sure we do. So one of the things that will tell you very effectively whether you're in a good L stance or not is, can you do a squat in that stance, right? Can you boom, boom, right? If you start to fall forward or fall back, or you can't get low enough, these are all signs that either you don't have your hips open enough, or maybe they're not flexible enough, right? Or my weight is too far forward, or my weight is too far back, or side to side. So if you're looking for a good metric of, hey, do I have a good stance? Is this where I feel comfortable? Get in your stance, drop it down to a squat, come back up, okay? If you can do that all the way through and not fall over, chances are you have something resembling a good stance, all right? So that's just another little metric for you guys to use there. So what we're going to do now, okay, is I'm going to show you guys a really basic movement drill that you can use to establish the good fundamentals of not only footwork, but also practice moving while you're in your stance. Jenny, can you see this blue thing?
Yes.
Here? Okay.
You're good.
So what I have here, guys, is just a 2x2 grid that I use painter's tape to make, okay? And I got into a good stance, and at each of the vertices here, each of the connections, what's up?
We have a request to explain that a bit more. It was not something he was aware of.
What's
How
that?
does this basic stance change if you are fighting with a shield or other weapon in your offhand? Do you want to wait and table
Yeah,
that?
that's a super good question. But let's wait till the end and we'll do a Q&A. Hold on to that one though. That's a fantastic question. I even got my shield and my Madu and my other swords to show you guys.
I'll remember you, Matt.
Okay, so we have here a 2x2 grid, right? And I found, what I did before making this grid is I found, okay, what's my good stance? How far apart do I like to keep my feet? And I made this grid based on that. Where the vertices of this grid is where my feet are going to be, okay? So, and it's super helpful. As you can see, I have like a tiled rug here, so I got to use that as a metric too. But really all you need is some chalk, some painter's tape, and you can make your own little grid, right? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to get into my good stance, and I'm going to put the edge of the ball of my feet almost in the middle of my feet on two of the vertices here. I mean, as you see, I can do this like middle left side and this middle back, okay? So, boom, I'm in my good stance, I'm feeling bouncy, I'm feeling relaxed, all right? And now I'm gonna move, okay? So what do? I'm just gonna step up to the next set of vertices, which is gonna be here, dead center, and high left, okay? So because I'm moving forward, my left leg is gonna move first, and my back leg is gonna move with me, right? So now I take a look at this little grid I made, and I listen to my body, okay? How did that feel? Do I still have a good balance? Am I unbalanced? Am I leaning a little too far forward? Am I leaning too far back? So on and so forth, right? At every point, guys, you wanna listen, okay? Progress is a slow process, right? And the sooner you can kind of understand and accept that fact, which is tough, especially in our kind of like fast food culture today and instant gratification, the sooner you can sort of accept the fact that you need to be patient and you need to do things like listen to your body and spend time critically thinking about your own development and taking responsibility for it, the better you're gonna get, okay? So, little bit of a digression there. Let's back up. I move to these two vertices, right? And I say, okay, am I still bouncy? Do I still have good balance? Yeah, I do. So then I'm gonna go over here and move to my right. And because I'm moving to my right, I'm going to move my right leg first, right? And my left leg will follow behind. Boom, just like that. Yep. The edge of the ball of my feet are perfectly where they need to go. I'm feeling good with my balance. my shoulders haven't come forward, I'm gesticulating a lot, but I'm keeping my sword where it needs to be too, and I'm gonna practice going backwards. Boom. Yep. Pretty good. Okay? So you can practice this at home. If you're saying, wow, that's a really basic ass drill, Anatole, you're right. It is a really basic ass drill, right? And I didn't come up with this. Let me give credit where credit is due. This is an old boxing drill for helping beginners instill good footwork and good stance mechanics, right? And as Delos likes to say, footwork makes the dream work, okay? But I can go forward, I can go backwards, I can just practice moving side to side, right? Additionally, what I can do is practice my stance switching, right? Boom, okay? Oh, see, I went a little too far into myself. So now my balance is going off this way. When you guys switch your feet, this is probably a really good time to think about it. You want it to be as if you're switching them on two rails. Boom, 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 okay? And the reason that is if you did what I just did a little while ago, kind of come off to the side like that, your balance is going to be compromised one way or the other. Now, is that going to happen in fighting? Absolutely. Fighting is chaos. Fighting is constantly changing motion. But we should always try and do everything perfect, okay? If you are practicing the exception to the rule, you're not practicing the rule, okay? The exception to the rule will be there when it needs to be, if you practice the rule enough. So, I'm in my good stance here. I'm switching my feet, right? I can even practice stepping diagonally with this little apparatus that I've constructed, right? Boom, boom, right? Boom, boom, right? Switch over to the other side, boom, right? You can play here, and play is a really good way to get better. We play a lot, don't we? We play our sparring game. We play the games of tournaments and first to tens and all those other games, right? Well, that sense of play will make you, hopefully, in a really good mood, in a positive mindset. And we learn things and we have these aha moments, these epiphanies, when we are in our best mindset, right? It's really hard to get those same realizations about your own progress when you're beating yourself up, okay? Which is also a good reason to start slow, right? And if you start slow, you're going to learn that slow is smooth, smooth is fast. So as you pick it up, you're going to be able to move a lot more fluidly, okay? So you can use this tool in a whole matter of ways, but play with it, right? One of the things that I like to do here, and the reason I've got it right here facing my sweet old friend, my pal, is so that I have a point of reference of where I should be standing when I'm addressing my pal, okay? I've got the middle of this thing going down the center line, okay? And I can step off and shoot. I can step up and shoot. So I can also test my ranges, okay? So that's a really good tool that you guys can use with just a little bit of space. I know a lot of us are home right now. We can't go out and fight the way we're supposed to. So take advantage of this time is my advice to you, right? Develop these fundamentals. I'll share a really quick story about that. I did not learn, hopefully we all know what block strike is, right? Block strike is pretty prevalent in all the games now, right? When I received my Warlord at Clan 2009, or Gathering of Crowns now, 2009, that was the first night I learned how to block strike. That's also the first night I ever fought Sir Spendthrift. And he whooped my ass. And he didn't do anything crazy. I was a brand new warlord. Like, I knew how to fight competently, right? He didn't do anything crazy. He just used the fundamentals, right? And I think the reason he was able to utilize those so effectively and just put me in a deep, dark hole is because he spent so much time honing his fundamentals, honing his basics, right? So they were razor sharp, right? if you're already good at something, okay, if you already do something very well, well, that knife is already sharp. All you got to do is maintain that skill. You know what I'm saying? If you lack certain skills, certain fundamentals, use that time, use this time right now to develop them, right? You can get a decent little workout here in 5-10 minutes, okay? So I think we're going to open this up for questioning now. Jenny, if you wouldn't mind reading me some questions. We had one, I think, about sword and board, and Florentine.
Yes. Okay, so first question was from Matt Howard.
What's up, Matt?
How does this basic stance change if you are fighting with a shield or another weapon in your offhand?
So, it doesn't, okay? If I'm using a shield, let me get a shield. This beautiful creation by Morpheus. Shout out to Ismail. If I've got my shield here, and I've got it upside down so you guys can see the applique if it looks a little weird. But if I've got my shield here, I'm still in a good stance, okay? I'm still in this basic L stance, all right? Put it up, I'm still in my basic L stance, okay? If I've got another sword, right? I'm still in my basic L stance. My elbows are still about a fist distance from my torso on each arm. I can be doing different things with my hands, right? Like I can do an A-frame guard or this denial guard or whatever. But my stance is pretty much the same, meaning my balance is the same, my form is the same, and my relaxation is the same, right? As what I think you're saying is a single sword stance, right? And that's because single sword really is the fundamentals of the other styles, right? Now, here's where we can get a little weird, Matt, and this is why I like this question. There are different stances, okay? So, for instance, I can do this more side stance sort of a thing, right? That you would see in point fighting, karate, or taekwondo tournaments. They use this sort of weird side stance, right? And they bounce, boom, 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 back and forth, right? Light on their feet, all right? And to do that, I really just kind of got to get in my L stance, right? It's because it's the building blocks, right? Shift to the side, and I put a little bit more weight on my back foot because it's all about being able to come forward quickly and get out quickly, right? You may also see what people call a horse stance or a square stance, which is this, okay? Boom, boom, boom. This is good for generating a lot of power, okay? I find the L stance to be the happy medium point between those two styles of standing, all right? So, but that's not necessarily true, actually. So with me, I like to adopt, and this is just my personal preference, right? I like to swing good, strong shots, or at least I try to. So I keep my hip, whatever hip is back, a little bit pointed forward. So it's just slightly like this square stance, okay? Just slightly, right? I engage it ever so slightly forward. But it's not so much that I'm standing square. As you can see, this kind of gives you a lot of potentials to attack both sides of the body, but it also leaves you very, very open, okay? We talked a little bit earlier about times and places of when to use these stances. If I'm doing this kind of side stance thing, I'm more trying to engage you at far range, moving into what we would call middle range, and then quickly darting back out. And I'm using my front foot here to sort of test what you're going to do without compromising or giving too much of myself, or rather committing myself too much and leaving myself open for a counter. when I'm doing this kind of wide stance, I'm getting low and I'm fighting at very close range, okay? And I like to get low. I like to really open my hips so that I have, boom, the top quadrants open to me, as well as the bottom quadrants, okay? Great question, Matt. What do we got next?
There's another question by Annette Hine.
Hey!
If someone is showing you a stance and the thing they're showing you hurts, what are some things you can adjust? We also had a follow-up comment by Mike Foss that says these are overall guidelines. Do what feels natural near around these tips. The goal is relaxed, not uncomfortable, and not holding extra tension. So once again, the original question was, if someone's showing you a stance and the things hurt, what are some things you can adjust?
So I agree with everything Mike said there. But if something is hurting, now hopefully you guys understand the difference between a little strain and actually hurting. And I'm not saying you don't, but you know, if you're a tough guy or whatever and you're like, I'll just tough it out, don't do that. Don't do that. If something really hurts, something is going on that is going to increase the potential for injury. And if you injure yourself, you're not going to be able to fight, which means you're not going to be able to develop, right? So first of all, if something hurts, listen to whatever that pain is telling you. It's hard to describe what you should do without like a specific example in that. And that's a fantastic question, by the way. But let's say, for example, that somebody is showing you a stance, maybe just the stance I showed you, okay? And your right hip, because you got your right leg back, you sort of feel this pain here in your ball and socket joint, right? Or not ball and socket joint, but just your joint from your leg to your hip. Is that a ball and socket joint? Is it?
Yes, I think so.
Is it? Ah,
So.
yeah.
I sure hope so now.
I know, right?
Looks like a ball to me.
Okay. So it could mean a couple of things. It could mean that your hips are too closed. It could mean that your knee is not open, right? Like, I really want my knees to be open, right? Because I want to be able to move in any direction effectively, as fluidly as possible, right? I don't want to compromise myself to not be able to move in a certain direction. So it could mean that you're not opening your hips or your knees, okay? Here's a common one. What if you feel a pain in your lower back, okay? And first I should say, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a physical therapist, anything like that. I'm just a nerd that has fought for a really long time, okay? So one thing, but this is something I do see a lot, all right? Especially in dudes, okay? If your lower labrum is hurting you, okay, when you adopt this stance, probably what's happening is you are rounding the back when you fight, putting a lot of unnecessary weight here on the lower part of the back, okay? Not only will this screw up your lower back, but you're also giving me your shoulders. And as somebody who loves to throw high wraps, okay, like a shoulder, like a shield side shoulder shot, that's an all-you-can-eat buffet, right? Because you're bringing those targets closer to me, right? And at the same time, you are, where's your weight going? All down here into your front foot, right? So what am I going to do? I'm going to wait till you try to move forward. You're not going to move forward that well. You're going to shift even more. You're going to hurt your back. And then I'm going to hurt your back. I'm not really going to hurt your back, but I'm going to wrap over that shoulder. And I love doing that. So don't give me what I want. Protect yourself. Hopefully that that answers your question. And that, again, it is tough if we're not talking about specific areas. So those are just some examples that I see most frequently. If there is something or a specific example that you got, just PM me, we can talk about it. But to sort of wrap this up, guys, I know you're all tough guys and girls, okay? I know you're real tough, but don't hurt yourself. Listen to your body. If it is hurting, you need to address that problem, okay? Maybe it's that you're not flexible enough, all right? Maybe you need to work on that with a little bit of yoga or some stretching or something like that. Maybe there's an old injury that is becoming re-aggravated, okay? If it hurts and you think it's serious, go see a doctor, for real. We really need as many people playing this game as possible and bringing everything they can into it so we can push this sport forward and continue to develop. We can't do that if you're all injuring yourself, right? So, take care of yourself, guys. Self-care is super important.
Next question is by Aaron. I hope I don't mess up your last name. Aaron Dorder.
That's PDQ.
I knew it. How do you determine your range? He asks.
Okay, so that's a really good question, and now we're starting to get a little bit outside of what a basic stance will get you, but that's totally fine because I love nerding out about wacky bats. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, all right, now I'm gonna fight. Yeah.
Well, he also says when either left or right foot forward, and when you envision your intentions with the step drill. So I'm not sure if that's a part of the same question, but
yeah, we can get into that.
Okay,
so let's go right hand forward, like we're fighting, I don't know, right hand single sword forward. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do here when I'm judging my distance or judging what would be my optimal distance to my opponent, actually let me back up. That's a really good question, and I think it deserves a couple of different points to be made. First of all, as is probably obvious, guys, everybody's range is going to be a little different, okay? I'm like 6 even on the dot, pretty average body type. So I know from fighting a lot what my range is. And I know here, when I get into a good stance, what my range is, right? What at the extreme expansion of my arm I can hit and what I can't hit, okay? Same thing with my left hand, okay? Now, here's some variations to that, okay? If I want to go forward a little bit, if I want to stretch that out, I'm going to move my front leg a little bit forward, okay? I'm going to move it in space. Now my extreme range, the extreme expansion of my forward arm has a little bit more space that I can reach out and touch somebody with, right? But what does that do? That also, the further my feet are apart from each other, the more kind of in the ground I'm going to be. The less I'm going to be able to move effectively because I'm going to need to get to a good place and then move effectively, right? I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying realize the intention behind what you're doing. So first and foremost, like I said earlier, right, I keep about a fist distance between my elbow and my torso, okay? And what that is that is the middle point between my contraction and the expansion of my arm, okay? To both extremes, all right? I'm not saying this is a really effective way to fight, but sometimes you're gonna need to do, the situation in a fight will force you to be unconventional or do something technically bad, right? Bad form, right? But you may need to block like this, right? So I like to keep my elbow between those 2 points, right? And that means in this good stance I have here, I know what my extreme range is here if I don't move, and I know what my extreme defense is here if I don't move. Now both these things are modified by movement and footwork, okay? Is that good? Because I feel like finding range is a very complicated subject and there's a lot of ways to do it, right? Finding what your range is. But if we're talking about in the domain of like how it relates to your stance, that's kind of how I find it. Now, if I'm finding range against an opponent, right, who knows what they're doing, let me let you guys in on a little secret, okay? Most good fighters, right, top tier fighters, whatever you want to call them, will start fighting, unless they're trying to be very aggressive or trying to do something specific, they'll start out at far range, okay? They'll start out at far range. And what they'll do is, because at far range we're safe, right? I can't hit my opponent can't hit me. So I start at far range, and then the game here is to move up to about middle range, right? And start testing what my opponent is going to do, okay? So let's go over this real quick. You have close range, you have middle range, you have far range, you have extreme far range, right? Each of those have their own games that you can play and skill sets that you can employ. But you also have these vaguer sort of ephemeral ranges that not a lot of people except very good fighters will utilize. Close middle, middle far, right? So in going with the example that I just gave, like let's say I'm fighting PDQ, right, which I would love to be doing right now, instead of being home, when we start here at far range, right, I'm going to dip my toe in middle while keeping my back foot in far range. I can still have a pretty good stance here. You guys will notice my front leg is a little far forward, but I'm not going so far forward as to really commit myself to this range. All I'm doing is testing the waters, right? I'm staying light on my feet, and maybe what I want to do too is start using a little bit of this expansion and contraction of my arm, right? As a bait, as a lure, as a tool that I will use to seek information about my opponent. And if you can figure out at what ranges your opponents are going to react in certain ways, man, that is the real chess game of foam fighting, right? It's gathering all that information. So I can use those tools to gather information. Hopefully, Pete, that answered your question. That's a super interesting topic. Maybe we could do a whole class on that, but good one, bro. What else?
Okay, Travis Truelove asks do you ever T-stance? I assume that means true love stance. Do you ever true love stance?
Do I ever true love stance?
Yeah.
I'm always in a true love stance.
I know. Oh, you're welcome, Annette.
I think what you mean here by a T-stance, and I'm not super familiar with that terminology, so I'm going to assume, Drogon, this is what you're talking about, is moving your back foot behind your front foot so that it sort of creates this T. Personally, I don't really like to use that stance too much, right? And the reason is I like to fight a little bit lower. I like to engage my hips and be in this kind of like ready to pounce sort of action when the fight's going on, right? When I'm in a T stance, I'm by necessity, if I'm picking up what you're putting down here, and if I called it right, you're a little bit taller, right? You can be bouncy. You're going to see this in fencers a little bit more. Brett, who is an amazing fighter, one that I respect very, very much, I think he probably utilizes a T stance better than just about anybody I've ever seen in this game. And maybe that meta will develop, but I feel like right now, for what it is, it kind of compromises me more than it gives me options, right? Now, having knowledge of a T stance, like I said, fighting is constantly changing motion and fighting is chaos. So having the knowledge that if somebody rushes up to me, I go, boom, right? And then maybe go back to another stance, totally great. Don't deprive yourself of any knowledge that you can gain. But if we're talking about my personal preference, I don't dig that too much. I also don't dig that my back foot is behind my front foot. I kind of like to lure people in and then make these pivots off to the side as they commit to a certain angle, if that makes sense. So that's hard to do because I have to unhitch my foot and put it where it needs to be. If I'm already in an L stance, right, it's less of a motion to pivot around my opponent. If that makes sense. But good question. What else we got?
Okay, William Johns wants
What's
to
up?
William Johns wants to know, how do you keep yourself from squaring up when you find yourself in an uncomfortably close range?
Okay. That's a really good question. I think that's my grand squire right there, too. But that's a fantastic question. And you may want to square up, right? Everything is conditional, okay? I want you guys to think about fighting less of x plus y equals z and more like x plus y could equal purple, right? We don't know. That's what's so exciting about fighting, okay? Is that I can only ever control myself, right? I can make suggestions as to what my opponents are going to do and help them sort of make those bad choices. But at the end of the day, I can only control myself. So let's kind of get back to your question though. How do you stop yourself from doing that, okay? So let's first assume that we just really don't want to do it. Like, let me give an example. Let's say I'm fighting a fighter that is shorter than me. Let's say that I'm fighting Delos, okay? And this isn't a short dig, but he is a little bit shorter. And if you let that guy get to close range, I think Peter said it best, one SKBC, it's like throwing a tennis ball at a tank, okay? It's hard to get over his shield, it's hard to get to his arm, and he is so good about changing levels and hitting this hip. So I do not want to get into a close range exchange with Delos if I can help it. And like I said earlier, if I'm getting into a close range battle with somebody, or exchange rather, I'm going to adopt more of that square stance, but I'm trying to stay away from that for right now. Okay, so I think this question kind of ties into a bigger question, which is what do you do when you've lost your ideal stance for that fight? Okay, what do you do? And really, that's the first thing that you should ask yourself, right? What do I do when it all goes south? Okay, chances are if it goes south, you've compromised your stance in some way. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, your stance is the first line of offense and of defense. So if we're in a defensive type situation here, right, and I've compromised my stance, well, I've also compromised my defense. You see how the two are kind of connected? So the first thing that I need to do is get my stance back, right? And maybe I move off to the side or I move backwards and I get back to a good stance, okay? I ain't trying to be out here fighting anybody with my feet too close together or too far, my shoulders too far forward, my weight distribution's all messed up, because that is going to give my opponent way more opportunities to beat me. And I don't want to get beat, right? So what I do when I lose my stance or I find myself going square, there's a couple things. I can switch my feet, right? And if I've spent the requisite amount of time I really should so that my stance is muscle memory, I can switch my feet, boom, and I can get back into a good stance, right? I'm square, someone rushes me, I can pivot off. I can get into a good stance, right? I can just turn and move away in a very ungracious manner and then get back into a good stance. But I think your question is more, what do I do when my stance is compromised?
There was a follow-up to that part of the question, which was how do you get yourself out of an uncomfortable situation?
Okay, so yeah,
Which
not
is-
to just go over the same thing. That's a fantastic question, but not to go over too much of the same thing that I just talked about. But you can do a lot of things, and it comes down to getting your stance back. If you become compromised in some way, the first thing you need to do is get your feet underneath you, right? Because you're going to need to move. You're going to need to reassert control over the fight, okay? Let me put it to you this way. Now, if you've taken any of my SKBC classes for the past decade or whatever, you probably heard me use this analogy a lot. But fighting is like dancing, okay? You have a lead and you have a follow. The difference is both people are trying to be the lead, okay? And you always want to be the lead. You want to have the initiative. okay? But inevitably there will be times when someone's going to take that initiative from you, okay? And when that happens, which it totally will, right? This is the chess match. This is the give and take of fighting, right? When that happens, you need to make sure you're on good footing to be able to reassert your control over the lead, if that makes sense, okay? So try and do whatever you can to get back to a good stance. If I'm too far forward, let's say that I'm trying to go up on high cross on somebody like Shion or Delos, who likes to throw a lot of this right side hip, right? I managed to hand block it, but they, I don't know, maybe I hit them in the head, or maybe they block it first. Well, see how compromised I am here? What am I going to do? Am I just going to keep trying to do that?
Seriously.
I might be, like, able to get a Simo out of that, but personally, I would rather do things very well and fight very well rather than get a meager Simo and fight it over again. Now, if that's going to happen, that's going to happen. That's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with that, right? But I want to try to employ good form as much as possible. So if I'm in this situation right here, I've hand blocked, maybe I've got an arm down, right? And maybe they shot their sword back up here and they're blocking this, right? Am I going to try and fight these guys from this position? Hell no. Okay? So what am I going to do? I'm going to, boom, move back into a good stance. Okay? So I like to use a switch foot a lot to do that, as you guys can probably tell. I also like to step off. Okay? For example, if, like, let's go back to that example. If I'm doing this and they're shooting for this hip, right? Which way am I going to go to get my good stance? And my opponent is roughly here, right? Let's say here so you guys can see. I'm going to go off, right? I do that pivot, okay? So that my hips are now underneath my shoulders. They're above my knees. My knees are above my ankles, okay? So I attempt to I make that a priority to get my feet back underneath me, because I want to be able to move well. But before we learn how to walk, we must first learn how to stand. You know what I mean? What else we got? Good question. Very good question.
All right. The wonderfully proportioned Elena Moreno Hansen asks, I am short. Well, she says, I am short and have T-Rex arms, and I need to close the distance faster. Where do you generate that power for movement? Hi, Elena.
Okay, so the first thing that you need to do, again, and I know I'm beating a drum here, but is have a good stance, okay? You need to be able to, as a shorter fighter, mid to close, okay, is going to be your home, all right? You can develop a very good far game. I'm not saying you can't, but if you have little T-Rex arms and you're shorter, you're going to be at a big disadvantage when you're fighting out at far range or extreme far range. So most intuitively and most obviously, mid to close is going to be your home, okay? The first thing you need to do is make sure that these explosive power generation muscles are engaged, like we talked about in the beginning, right? So I've dropped my weight. I'm up on the balls of my feet. Like, I'm not doing this Michael Jackson. God damn, that hurts. But sorry. Usually I do that with shoes. But my hips are open. My knees are open, right? I've got about 60% of my weight on my back leg. I've got about 40% of my weight on my front leg, okay? And this is because I'm going to use that weight. I'm going to push off the ground, adding the surface that I'm standing on, the earth, to that motion to be able to effectively move forward in an explosive manner, okay? Now, if we're talking about some strategy on how to do that, that's the basic movement. But if we're talking about some strategy, right? Wait till you use that big macro motion, okay? That big jump, that lunge. Wait to do that till you have moved up to about mid-range, right? And then employ that. That's gonna make it a little bit more sellable, and you're gonna be able to actually get to your opponent quicker that way. I think, if that makes sense. What else? What time we got?
Okay, it is 6:11.
Okay.
So
We'll do
we
that.
only have a couple more questions.
Oh,
honestly.
great, cool.
Okay, Asuka B Hitnoko says.
Hey, what's up, Oscar?
Asuka says, "You seem pretty tall. What's a good stance to use that utilizes height?"
I am pretty tall. No, I'm pretty average again, right? Just 6 foot. So what utilizes height here? That's a fantastic question, by the way, because now we're getting into the minutia of like preferences, right? I like to, if I'm tall and I want to use my height to my advantage, okay? I'm actually going to move my front foot in just a tad, right? So I naturally sort of posture up a little bit. Additionally, we talked about our fist being midpoint between these upper quadrants and these lower quadrants here, and halfway between our extreme expansion and contraction, okay? I'm going to move that slightly up as well. So this is me normal, okay? But ooh, I see a short fighter, and I know I want to use that a little bit to my advantage, right? I'll move this in, and I'll come up a little bit. Now, this is not going to a T stance, okay? This isn't doing that. It's just a slight variation, a slight modification. I'm still on the balls of my feet. My knees are still open. My hips are still open. My shoulders are still back, right? I make sure my chin is slightly up. But I sort of posture up here. And my whole strategy at this point is to be able, I'm not so much worried about my lower quadrants, right? Is to be able to attack the upper quadrants and the arm of my opponent as it comes out into space, okay? And typically what I'm going to try and do is come over the blade, right? Over the blade. If the blade is coming, I'm trying to use my posture here to put my arm and my shot in a more advantageous position to come over that blade, like you do when you high cross somebody, right? So that's just a little personal variation if I'm trying to take advantage of my height against a smaller opponent. What else we got? Good question, Oscar.
Okay, Paul Kannenberg asks, how do you feel about switching front foot as part of shot footwork? Not really stance, but switching was mentioned, so I wanted to see if that's a thing.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Let me give you guys an example. Okay, and I think Delos on the One Grind Nation has a video all about this particular concept. And I would highly suggest you guys go check that out at One Grind Nation on Facebook. But let's say I'm here, I'm left foot forward in what we traditionally call a defensive sword and board stance, right? And I'm fighting somebody who has the same handedness as me, meaning a right-handed fighter. I'm lined up on the center line against them. Okay, one of the coolest things you can do that's going to put you in a really good position to take advantage of their shield side targets, right, is as you throw a fake, okay, like let's say I'm throwing this high cross fake right here, is to switch my feet and then boom, come under for that sword side hip, okay? So one more time, right? I step and execute, okay? Boop, bah, right? And I switch my feet. And what that also allows me to do is be in a very advantageous position to then start moving around my opponent's shield side. They can't hit me with their shield, right? Maybe they can, but I'm not going to take it, right? I don't have to take it. So that's just one example of using a stance switch in correlation to a shot. Right? You can do that with everything, right? Like you could do that with Florentine as well. Okay, I've got my left foot forward here, right? Well, I can fake, switch my stance, go low, go high, right? Because I'm taking this back arm here, my right arm, bringing it a little bit closer, right? Maybe I throw a juke, boom, right? Another good one is for Florentine, is if they throw this outside wrap to my left hand, I can catch it, switch my feet, and chop the arm, okay? So yeah, absolutely. Play with it. Going back to that concept of playing, guys, you discover so many things when you just play, when you're not so concerned about winning and losing, and you're more just trying to be in a positive and receptive mindset. That's when you're going to learn the most. That's when you're going to have the most aha moments, okay? What else we got?
Okay, you have Daniel James Tomei asking, from the example that you gave during the T stance, how do you train to make that pivot when you lure your opponent to move into you? I tend to back straight out when someone moves in on me, and it allows them to get a better angle on me.
Okay, so pivoting in and of itself is a subject. When to pivot, how to pivot, what are the situations that are going to necessitate a pivot, how can you use a pivot? That could be like a whole class in and of itself. So I'm going to try and condense this to just what your question is asking, okay? How do you train that pivot? All right, so we all know it's a good idea to move side to side, okay? We all know that, right? That we're going to have to move side to side, moving laterally. But we don't always just want to run parallel to our opponent, right? If I'm fighting you, right, and I'm just doing this, I'm not necessarily changing the angle. I'm just changing where the center line is in a space that we've already sort of recognized, if that makes sense, okay? So what I do to pivot is I move this back foot, boom, just a little bit here, and then I shift my hips to point at my opponent, right? So it looks like, boom, this, okay? I am moving not laterally, but circuitously, right? Boom, 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 boom. That's a great way to practice how to pivot, right? Plant your front foot, move out, shift your hips. Move out, shift your hips. Move out, shift your hips, okay? This is a extremely important skill to develop, especially for sword and board, right? Because sword and board kind of boils down to who has the better position, who's utilizing their passive defense better than the other guy, putting themselves in good positions to not get hit, but also to hit your opponent, right? So it probably doesn't take a lot of imagination to see how being able to pivot around your opponent's guard, their shield, their sword, will put you in those positions. There's a saying that I like to steal from jiu-jitsu that I find is super relevant for sword and board fighting. For fighting in general, right? But especially relates to sword and board fighting, and that is position before submission. A lot of people want to bang it out and then try and move when they have to. Move first and then throw your shot, okay? So you can pivot one way, you can pivot the other way. Of course, if I'm going to be moving this back leg over here, that's going to be more effort, right? So maybe I want to stance switch before that, kind of tying it into the last question, right? So if I'm here, I'm boom, bang, right? But you can still do that. You just need to readdress your hips. The hips don't lie, my friends, right? If you're wondering what to look at in an opponent that's going to give you information, you can look at the shoulders, you can look at the eyes, you can look at the hands, you can look at the feet. That all these can deceive you, right? Because we can look somewhere we don't mean to go. We can come forward a little bit with our shoulders, but really we might be baiting for a shot. We might be setting up a low shot, right? We can seem like we've got busy feet, right? And then when it starts going, we have very disciplined feet. So all these things can lie, right? The hips never lie, right? So you can point your hips at your opponent and they will have to respond to that, okay? Just as a way to sort of gauge how to square up against somebody. And I know we're kind of jumping around here, guys, but it's one of the wonderful things about fighting is there's simple answers that and simple truths that kind of unlock way more doors and way more questions than they do give just a definitive do this or do that, right? Fighting's not so black and white. It's a lot of gray, right? There's a time and place for everything.
There is one last question. So if folks have a question, then you got like a minute.
Yeah.
Okay, so Matthew Gifford asks, how do you create minimum distance between you and your opponent to get your opponent to miss their shot?
Oh, now that is a really good question. And again, another one that we could spend a lot of time talking about. But the key comes down to footwork, my friend. Footwork makes the dream work, okay? If you have good footwork, you can control the range, or rather, you can be the lead, which gives you a lot more suggestion power over how to control the range between you and your opponent. Also, you can have a lot of influence over the timing of the fight, right? And what timing you can use to get close to your opponent, okay? For your specific example, I would say utilize very good footwork to put yourself in advantageous positions, right? So let's say I'm fighting another, I don't know, a sword and border, right-handedness again, right? And I'm using my footwork to get in close, right? If I have a good stance, kind of tying this into the whole point of the class, I can do all this stuff, right? I can be light on my feet enough that I can employ good footwork that's going to allow me to influence the range and the timing a lot easier, right? And also, move out again if my opponent becomes a little too savvy or they throw something up that I don't really like the look of, okay? So I can use my footwork to get in about as close, and I can use these information-seeking techniques, right? I can get my foot in a little bit and see what my opponent's going to do. Are they going to swing at me? Okay, if they're going to swing at me, they're telling me at what range they are comfortable engaging and throwing shots, and I can use that information and adapt to that as I want or as I please, right? But maybe they don't, right? Maybe I kind of dip in a little bit, and I even give a little pump here. I kind of just expand slightly with my sword, right? And they sort of tense up. Oh, okay. So now we're figuring out how to measure where our opponents like to engage with us, right? So I can take my little double step in and see what they want to do, right? Information seeking techniques like that come from having a good stance, that come from training your feet, being aware of who has the lead and who has the follow, are the tools that you're going to learn to use in order to find good information out. So it's kind of a vague question, but it's a good question because it depends on the other fighter and what their responses to what you're going to do are going to be. Okay? You have any last ones?
There are 2 questions more.
Okay, we're going to do those and then we're cutting it.
Okay, Justice King asks, using flow, how do you bait a sword and border?
How do you bait a sword and border? Okay. Well, there are about a bajillion ways to do it. Okay. So I'm just going to give you a few of those, right? And I'm not trying to be glib here, Justice. I'm trying to express that everything is very situational in fighting, right? I can give you 100 best practices of like, okay, well, what you want to do here is get in a denial guard, but then start leaning out that front shoulder a little bit. Now, don't do it so much that it compromises your weight distribution and puts way more weight on that front leg, okay? But just a little bit, right? I can draw them out, block, boom, hit the arm, right? I can do something like this. Purposefully take a square-ish looking stance, but when my opponent decides to charge, take that back foot and pivot, okay? I can keep just like boxing, right? Just like I'm using the jab here. I can keep my forward hand very low, okay? But what all this comes back to is, am I in the right stance? Do I have a good enough stance to be able to employ all these tricks and baits without it backfiring on me, okay? What's the next question?
The last question by Daniel James Tomei is, would you be willing to make another video on how to incorporate pivoting / lateral movement into our fighting?
No. No, just kidding. Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic idea, Daniel. And I love these questions that you guys are asking because, you know, not to keep repeating myself, but we can go on and on and on. Like, this is a very deep well that we can sort of pull information from and use that information to make ourselves better fighters, right? So, yeah, sure. I got a lot of time now, so I don't see why I wouldn't be able to do that. But if you have some specific things that you want to see, shoot me a little DM or whatever and say, hey, Anatole, I would like to see these things. And maybe, you know, it won't be me. Maybe it will be somebody else that does it too, because being a part of Sword Night Boot Camp and being a part of this community, you know, there are a lot of really, really good fighters that could also give you a different perspective. And in general, you want to try and learn from as many people as you can, right? Something I say may not jive with you too well, but like, let's say Peter the Quick says something that's fundamentally the same, but he says it in such a way that's going to resonate better for your experiences and your body type, right, in foam combat. So, yes, that's a great class idea. Thank you for that inspiration. Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Hopefully you guys are staying safe. You're practicing good hygiene. You're washing your hands, social distance. You're only going outside for essential items. But to reiterate, guys, use this time if you can, right? It really doesn't take a lot of time to be able to practice things, right? Practice these good fundamentals, okay? Going back to that earlier story of me fighting spin, right? That was an eye-opening moment for me where I realized that I had gotten to where I was mostly out of athletic ability and having some really good tricks, okay? Some really good trick shots that I like to use, all right? But when I came up against somebody that had honed their fundamentals to a fine point and they put me in the ground with it, man, that gave me a fantastic metric, a fantastic point rather, that I learned, okay, I need to take myself. I need to improve, right? And I need to learn these fundamentals. So use this time, guys. Don't make this be dead time. This is a live time, right? Thank you guys so much for joining in. Peace.